The Zekthari Empire had conquered 47 star systems in the past century. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy, nor the most technologically advanced. What made them unstoppable was their intelligence network. They studied their enemies with patience and precision. They learned every weakness, every pattern, every hierarchy. By the time they struck, victory was already certain. Commander Thralix stood in the intelligence chamber of the orbital station, surrounded by holographic displays. Before him floated the image of a human vessel, damaged and drifting. The ship was called the UNSC Perseverance, and it had been transmitting a distress signal for 3 days before the Zekthari intercepted it. "Bring them in," Thralix ordered. "Carefully. I want them alive and unharmed." The recovery operation took 6 hours. The human ship was pulled into the station's docking bay, and 7 survivors were extracted. Thralix watched through cameras as his soldiers guided the humans into holding cells. They were frightened, but not broken. That was good. Broken subjects provided poor intelligence. The interrogations began immediately, but Thralix was patient. He did not use torture or violence. The Zekthari had learned long ago that fear produced lies while comfort produced truth. The humans were given food, water, and medical attention. Their injuries were treated. After 3 days, they began to talk. The human military structure slowly revealed itself. There was a captain, a woman named Rivera. She commanded the ship and made strategic decisions. Below her were 2 lieutenants who managed different sections of the vessel. There were sergeants who led small teams and gave tactical orders. At the bottom were privates and specialists who followed commands and performed specific duties. Thralix documented everything. He compared the human structure to 17 other species they had conquered. It was remarkably similar, hierarchical, logical, predictable. The captain held authority. The lieutenants executed her vision. The sergeants controlled the ground troops. Remove the captain and the command structure collapsed. Eliminate the sergeants and the troops became directionless. "This will be simple," Thralix told his assistant, a younger intelligence officer named Vextil. "Humans organize themselves like the Tarathi and the Grexian clans. We already know how to defeat such systems." Vextil hesitated, his head tendrils twitching nervously. "Sir, there is one designation we do not fully understand." Thralix turned to look at him. "Explain." The younger officer pulled up a file. "One of the humans is referred to as Doc by all the others. His actual rank appears to be Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class named Marcus Chen, but everyone, including the captain, calls him Doc." "A medical officer," Thralix said, nodding. "Non-combatant, continue." "Yes, sir. But the behavioral patterns are unusual. The captain consults him frequently, not just for medical matters. The sergeants defer to him in certain situations. Even the privates treat him with unusual respect. It does not fit the hierarchical model." Thralix examined the footage of Doc Chen. The human was average height, lean build, with dark hair and calm eyes. He moved through the holding area with quiet confidence. When other prisoners were anxious, they looked to him. When someone was injured, he was there immediately with his medical supplies. "It is likely a cultural quirk," Thralix concluded. "Many species show affection to their healers. It means nothing strategically. The Doc has no command authority, no weapons training, no tactical value. He is support personnel. Should we separate him from the others?" Vextil asked. "No, let him remain. He keeps them calm, which makes them easier to study." Thralix closed the file. "Focus your analysis on the command structure. That is where wars are won and lost." Over the following weeks, Thralix compiled a comprehensive report. He learned about human military academies, promotion systems, and chain of command. He studied their tactics in previous conflicts with other species. He identified their strengths and their weaknesses. The humans were resilient and adaptable, but they relied heavily on their command structure. Their technology was adequate but not exceptional. Their numbers were significant but not overwhelming. Most importantly, they were new to the galactic stage. They had fought only 3 major conflicts, all against species weaker than the Zekthari. Thralix presented his findings to the War Council. 12 high-ranking generals and admirals sat in a circular chamber, their head tendrils waving as they absorbed the data. "The humans control 14 colony worlds and their home system," Thralix explained. "Their military is organized into 3 branches, but their space-based forces are the most relevant to our concerns. If we strike quickly at their command infrastructure, they will fragment. What about their doc? One admiral asked. The medical officer you mentioned in your preliminary report. Thralix had almost forgotten about that detail. A non-issue, Admiral. He is a medic. No combat role, no command authority. Their affection for him is emotional, not tactical. The council members nodded, satisfied. The decision was made. The Zekthari would invade human space. The first target would be New Sarajevo, a strategic colony world that served as a military hub. With New Sarajevo captured, the surrounding systems would be isolated and vulnerable. 3 months later, the invasion fleet assembled at the edge of human territory. 50 warships carrying 30,000 soldiers. Thralix himself joined the expedition as chief intelligence officer. He wanted to see his analysis proven correct. As the fleet prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Thralix reviewed his files one final time. Every detail had been checked. Every possibility had been considered. The humans would be caught off guard, their command structure would be dismantled, and victory would be swift. His eyes passed over the file marked Chen, Marcus Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Designation, Doc. He closed it without reading further. Some details were simply not important. The fleet jumped. Within hours, they would reach New Sarajevo. Within days, the human colony would fall. Thralix was certain of it. After all, the Zekthari were never wrong about these things. Behind them, in the holding cells of the station, the 7 human prisoners waited. Captain Rivera sat with her head in her hands. The sergeants paced nervously. The privates whispered to each other about rescue that might never come. And Doc Chen sat quietly in the corner, his medical bag beside him, his eyes distant. He was thinking, planning, waiting. Because that was what docs did. They waited for the moment when they were needed most. That moment was coming soon. The attack on New Sarajevo began at dawn. The Zekthari fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They moved with precision, jamming communications before the colony could send a distress signal. 50 warships against a world protected by only 12 defense platforms and 3 aging cruisers. The battle was over in 90 minutes. General Krathnor commanded the invasion from his flagship. He watched the tactical display as landing craft descended toward the planet's surface. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The humans had been caught completely off guard, just as Thralix had predicted. The first target was the Colonial Defense Headquarters in New Sarajevo's capital city. 2,000 Zekthari soldiers dropped from the sky in armored carriers. They encountered resistance from human marines, but the defenders were outnumbered and unprepared. Within 4 hours, the headquarters fell. General Krathnor walked through the captured building, stepping over debris and scorch marks. His soldiers were rounding up prisoners and securing equipment. The human commander, a colonel named Patterson, had been killed in the initial assault. His second-in-command, Captain Rivera, was found in the communications center trying to send a message to Earth. Secure her, Krathnor ordered. She will be valuable for intelligence purposes. Captain Rivera was pulled to her feet by 2 soldiers. She was bleeding from a cut above her eye, and her uniform was torn. But her expression was defiant. This isn't over, she said in heavily accented Zekthari. Help will come, perhaps, Krathnor replied calmly. But it will arrive too late. The prisoners were separated according to rank, just as Thralix had recommended. Officers were taken to a secure facility for interrogation. Non-commissioned officers were sent to a military detention camp outside the city. Regular soldiers were distributed among several holding facilities. Support personnel, technicians, engineers, and medical staff were placed in a separate camp with minimal security. Among the support personnel was Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Marcus Chen. Duck had been in the headquarters medical bay when the attack began. He had treated 3 wounded Marines before the building was overrun. When the Zekthari soldiers burst through the door, he had his hands raised and a medical armband clearly visible on his sleeve. I am a medical officer, he said clearly in basic galactic standard. I am treating wounded. I request permission to continue under the galactic medical protocols. The Zekthari soldiers hesitated, then consulted their commander. After a brief discussion, Doc was allowed to finish treating the wounded before being escorted outside. His medical bag was scanned thoroughly, revealing bandages, antiseptics, pain medication, surgical tools, and various other supplies. Nothing that could be classified as a weapon. You may keep your equipment, the Zekthari lieutenant told him. You will be needed to treat both prisoners and our own forces. Doc nodded. Thank you. Where are you taking us? To a processing center. You will be assigned to appropriate facilities based on your function. The processing center was a converted warehouse near the spaceport. Hundreds of human prisoners were lined up, being identified and categorized. Doc waited patiently in the line, observing everything. He noted the number of guards, their weapons, their patrol patterns. He memorized faces and listened to conversations. When his turn came, a Zekthari clerk scanned his identification chip and reviewed his records. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Marcus Chen, the clerk read aloud. Medical Specialist. Non-combatant status. You will be assigned to Camp 7 with other support personnel. Understood, Doc said. He paused, then added, Some of my patients were sent to the military detention camp. I should continue their treatment to prevent complications. The clerk considered this. That can be arranged. We will provide you with transportation to visit Camp 3 twice per week for medical rounds. Thank you. That's very professional of you. Camp 7 was a cluster of prefabricated buildings surrounded by a basic fence. The security was minimal, only 6 guards for 300 prisoners. The Zekthari clearly did not consider engineers and technicians to be a threat. Doc was assigned to a bunk in a building with 20 other people. He unpacked his medical bag carefully, taking inventory of everything he had. Then he sat down and waited. The other prisoners were scared and confused. They asked questions Doc could not answer. When were they going to be released? Would Earth send help? What would happen to them? I don't know, Doc admitted. But we'll survive this. That's what humans do. On the 3rd day, Doc was transported to Camp 3, the military detention facility. This camp was much more secure, with high walls, guard towers, and regular patrols. Inside, he found 247 Marines, soldiers, and sailors. Many were wounded. All were demoralized. Doc was escorted to a makeshift medical station where he could work. The Zekthari guards watched him carefully at first, but they quickly realized he was doing exactly what he claimed. He treated infections, changed bandages, set broken bones, and distributed pain medication. The Marines watched him move through the camp with expressions of relief. A young private, barely 20 years old, grabbed his sleeve. Doc, what do we do? How do we get out of here? Doc knelt beside the private, pretending to examine an injury on his leg. His voice was low and calm. We do what we always do, Marine. We adapt, we survive, and we wait for the moment. What moment? You'll know it when it comes. Doc smiled reassuringly. Trust me. Have I ever let you down? The private shook his head. No, Doc, never. As Doc worked, he memorized the camp layout. He counted guards and noted shift changes. He observed which gates were used most frequently and which areas had the least surveillance. He listened to the guards talking, learning bits of information about supply schedules and communication protocols. By the time he was escorted back to Camp 7 that evening, he had mentally cataloged everything that might be useful later. That night, as the other prisoners slept, Doc sat awake in his bunk. He thought about the Marines in Camp 3, scared and hurting. He thought about Captain Rivera wherever they were holding her. He thought about Earth and whether help was coming. Then he opened his medical bag and carefully examined each item. A scalpel could be more than a surgical tool. Bandages could hide small objects. Empty medication vials could carry messages. Antiseptic could be used for purposes other than cleaning wounds. Doc Chen had been in 3 wars before this one. He had seen combat on 4 different worlds. He had pulled wounded Marines out of burning buildings and treated injuries under enemy fire. The Zekthari had looked at his rank and seen a medic. They had looked at his equipment and seen medical supplies. They had no idea what they were really looking at. Doc began to plan. It would take time, patience, and careful preparation. But he had all 3. And when the moment came, when his Marines needed him most, he would be ready. Because that was what Docs did. They kept their people alive no matter what it took. 3 weeks into the occupation, the Zekthari believed they had complete control of New Sarajevo. General Krathnor reviewed reports in his command center with satisfaction. Resistance had been minimal after the first few days. The human prisoners were subdued and cooperative. Production facilities were being converted to support Zekthari forces. Everything was proceeding smoothly. What the general did not know was that Doc Chen had been busy. Doc's twice-weekly visits to Camp 3 had become routine. The guards barely paid attention to him anymore. He arrived, treated the prisoners, and left. Simple, predictable, exactly what Doc wanted them to think. But during those visits, Doc was doing much more than treating injuries. He started with the sergeants. In the chaos of the invasion, they had lost their command structure. Captain Rivera was gone. The lieutenants were in separate facilities, and the Marines were scattered across multiple camps. The sergeants were trying to maintain discipline, but without coordination, they were just holding on. Doc changed that. "Sergeant Willis," Doc said quietly as he bandaged the man's shoulder, "I need you to do something for me." Willis was a veteran with 15 years of service. He looked at Doc with tired eyes. "What do you need?" "Start organizing the men. Nothing obvious. Just small groups, 5 or 6 Marines who trust each other. Have them ready to move when the time comes." "Move where?" "We're locked in here, Doc. Not forever." Doc's voice was steady and confident. "Help is coming. And when it does, we need to be ready to help ourselves. Can you do that?" Willis studied Doc's face, then slowly nodded. Yeah, I can do that." Doc moved through the camp, having similar quiet conversations with other sergeants. He never said too much. He never put anything in writing. But slowly, quietly, the Marines began to organize themselves. Back at Camp 7, Doc was building something else entirely. The support personnel were engineers, technicians, and specialists. They were not trained for combat, but they had other skills that Doc needed. He started with a woman named Sarah Kim, an electrical engineer who had worked on the colony's power grid. Doc found her sitting alone in the mess hall, staring at her food. "Ms. Kim," Doc said, sitting down across from her, "can I ask you something technical?" She looked up, surprised. "I guess so." "The Zekthari use a different power frequency than we do. I notice their equipment sometimes interferes with our medical monitors. Do you think someone could use that interference to disrupt their systems?" Kim thought about it. "Maybe. I'd need to know more about their equipment." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." "Professional interest," Doc smiled. "But if you happen to observe anything about their power systems, I'd be interested to hear about it." Over the following days, Kim started paying attention to the Zekthari equipment. So did the other engineers and technicians. Once Doc had similar conversations with them, they began sharing observations, discussing possibilities, identifying vulnerabilities. Doc also worked on the guards themselves. The Zekthari had assigned him to treat not just prisoners but also their own soldiers who fell ill. Human and Zekthari biology were different enough that some human bacteria caused problems for the aliens. A guard would develop a fever or digestive issues, and Doc would be called to provide treatment. Doc always treated them professionally and efficiently. He made small talk while he worked. He asked about their families, their homeworlds, their opinions on various topics. The guards began to relax around him. They saw him as harmless, just a medic doing his job. And while they talked, Doc listened and learned. He learned that supply convoys arrived every Tuesday and Thursday. He learned that the guard shifts changed at dawn and dusk. He learned that the Zekthari communication system used quantum encryption that required line-of-sight relay stations. He learned which guards were cruel and which were simply following orders. One guard in particular, a young soldier named Trixall, became talkative when he was sick. Doc had treated him for a severe fever, staying with him through the night to monitor his condition. "You are good at your job," Trixall said weakly, "better than our own medics." "I've had practice," Doc replied, adjusting the IV line. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Thank you." Trixall paused. "Why do they call you Doc? Is that your name?" "No, my name is Marcus. Doc is what my Marines call me." "Your Marines? You are not a soldier?" "I'm a corpsman. It means I take care of Marines." Doc checked Trixall's temperature. "In human military, especially the Marines, the corpsman is part of the unit. We go where they go. We fight when they fight. We keep them alive. But you wear no weapons. I don't need weapons. I have other ways to protect my people." Doc smiled gently. "Your fever is breaking. You'll be back on duty in a day or two." Trixall nodded gratefully. "The supply convoy arrives tomorrow morning. I will have to process the medical supplies. Perhaps there is something specific you need." Doc's expression did not change, but his mind filed away every word. "Just the basics. Antibiotics, bandages, pain medication, whatever you can spare." After Trixall fell asleep, Doc sat quietly in the guard station. He now knew the exact time the convoy would arrive. He knew where the medical supplies were processed. He knew which gate would be opened and for how long. Piece by piece, Doc was building a picture of the entire occupation. Guard rotations, supply schedules, communication protocols, weaknesses in the fence lines, blind spots in the surveillance system. He kept it all in his memory, organized and ready. He also began preparing his medical bag for purposes the Zekthari would never suspect. Empty medication vials became message carriers. He would write tiny notes on dissolving paper and hide them in the vials, sealed with medical tape. During his visits to Camp 3, he would accidentally leave these vials where the sergeants would find them. Instructions, information, encouragement, bandages became hiding places for small tools that the engineers fashioned from scrap materials. A piece of metal that could serve as a pry bar, a shard of glass that could cut through plastic ties. Nothing that would be noticed if his bag was searched, but everything that might be needed later. His surgical thread was actually high-tensile wire that could be used for multiple purposes. His scalpel handles could be taken apart and reassembled into small cutting tools. His stethoscope tubing could carry liquids or be used as a tourniquet or a garrote. The Zekthari looked at his medical bag and saw exactly what they expected to see. Medical supplies, healing tools, nothing dangerous. They could not have been more wrong. 6 weeks into the occupation, Doc had accomplished something remarkable. He had created a network of communication between 3 camps. He had organized the Marines into small ready teams. He had identified the engineers and technicians who could be trusted with larger plans. He had mapped the entire occupation force's patterns and procedures, and he had done all of it while appearing to be nothing more than a cooperative medic. One evening, as Doc sat in his bunk at Camp 7, a young technician named Rodriguez approached him nervously. "Doc, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you doing all this?" "Organizing people, gathering information." "What's the point? We're stuck here. Earth is weeks away even if they send help." Doc looked at Rodriguez for a long moment. "Do you know what a corpsman's job is?" "You're a medic, right?" "That's part of it. But the real job is bigger." Doc leaned forward. "My job is to keep my Marines alive. All of them, no matter what it takes. And right now my Marines are in Camp 3, scared and hurting. So I'm going to do whatever I need to do to bring them home. Even if help never comes, help will come. But we need to be ready when it does." Doc stood up and put a hand on Rodriguez's shoulder. "And when that moment arrives, I need to know I did everything possible to prepare. Because that's what docs do." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Doc smiled. "For now, keep watching, keep learning, and be ready." In the command center, General Crathnor received his evening reports. Everything was calm. The prisoners were subdued. The medic Chen continued his routine visits. No problems, no concerns. The general had no idea that his perfect occupation was built on a foundation that was slowly being undermined. Piece by careful piece by a single human with a medical bag and an unbreakable promise. The UNSC Indomitable dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Sarajevo system on day 73 of the occupation. Captain Sarah Wu stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display. Her battle group consisted of 8 cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 40 support vessels. It was the largest force Earth had been able to assemble on short notice. It was not enough. "Sensors show heavy Zekthari fortification," her tactical officer reported. "They've reinforced the defense platforms and have at least 30 warships in orbit. They're using the civilian population as shields." Wu's jaw tightened. A direct assault would result in massive casualties, both military and civilian. The Zekthari had positioned their forces perfectly. They had studied human tactics and knew that humans would not sacrifice their own people for a tactical victory. "Communications. Keep trying to reach the surface," Wu ordered. "We need intelligence on prisoner locations and occupation force disposition." "No response, Captain. All normal channels are jammed." Wu had expected that. The Zekthari would not allow easy communication. She was about to order the fleet to pull back and regroup when her communications officer suddenly straightened. "Captain, I'm receiving something strange. It's not on any normal frequency. It's coming through the medical telemetry band." "Medical telemetry?" "Yes, ma'am. It's the frequency used for remote patient monitoring. The signal is incredibly weak and buried in background noise. If we weren't looking for it, we would never have noticed." "Can you decode it?" The officer worked frantically. It's a data package, heavily compressed, encrypted with a military cipher that's 3 generations old. He paused. Captain, this is intelligence data. Very detailed intelligence data. Wu leaned forward. Put it on screen. The data unfolded before her. Maps of the occupation forces, guard rotation schedules, locations of all prisoner camps, structural weaknesses in the Zekthari defense network, communication relay points, supply convoy routes, everything she needed to plan a precision strike. At the bottom of the file was a signature, HM2 Marcus Chen, UNSC Medical Corps. Who is Marcus Chen? Wu asked. Her executive officer checked the records. Hospital corpsman 2nd class. He was part of the original Perseverance crew that was captured. According to this, he's currently held in a low-security camp designated as Camp 7. A medic sent us this? Wu stared at the data. How did he gather all this intelligence? I don't know, ma'am. But it's accurate. I can cross-reference it with our orbital scans. Everything matches perfectly. Wu studied the information carefully. There was more than just data here. There was a plan. A detailed plan for a coordinated uprising that would coincide with an external strike. The plan required precise timing and specific actions from her fleet. He's been planning this for weeks, Wu said softly. Maybe months? Communications, can you send a response? Not through this channel, ma'am. It's one way only. Whoever set this up was incredibly clever. The signal is hidden in normal medical monitor noise. The Zekthari would never detect it unless they knew exactly what to look for. Wu made her decision. Implement his plan, exactly as he's written it. Prepare assault teams and coordinate with the timetable he's provided. We move in 72 hours. On the surface of New Sarajevo, Doc received confirmation that his message had been received. The confirmation came through a method even more subtle than his original transmission. A small variation in the power grid frequency, detectable only by the engineers who were watching for it. Doc gathered his network. In Camp 7, he met quietly with Kim and Rodriguez and 15 others. Help is coming, he told them simply. 3 days. We need to be ready. What do you need us to do? Kim asked. Doc laid out his instructions. They would need to disable specific power junctions at specific times. They would need to create diversions. They would need to be ready to move quickly when the moment came. At Camp 3, Doc's message reached the sergeants through a note hidden in a bandage roll. The Marines began their preparations. They fashioned weapons from whatever they could find. Pieces of metal from bed frames, rocks from the exercise yard, anything that could be used in close combat. The Zekthari noticed nothing. Why would they? The prisoners had been docile for months. The medic continued his routine visits. Everything was normal. On the 3rd day at dawn, everything changed at once. The UNSC Indomitable's strike force hit the Zekthari fleet with precision attacks that exploited every weakness Doc had identified. At the same moment, the power grid across New Sarajevo experienced cascading failures. Communication relays went offline. Security systems shut down. In Camp 7, Doc moved quickly. Now, he told his team. Kim and the engineers used tools they had hidden to break open the main power junction. The fence went dead. The surveillance cameras stopped working. The automatic locks on the gates failed. The 6 guards at Camp 7 suddenly found themselves facing 300 prisoners who were no longer afraid. They surrendered without firing a shot. At Camp 3, the Marines moved with practiced efficiency. They had been organized into teams for weeks, just waiting for this moment. When the power failed, they overwhelmed the guards using improvised weapons in sheer numbers. Within minutes, they controlled the camp. Doc arrived at Camp 3 in a stolen Zekthari transport vehicle. He walked through the gates to find Sergeant Willis and the other Marines securing the facility. Doc? Willis called out. Right on time. Always, Doc replied with a slight smile. Casualties? Minor injuries only. We did it exactly like you said. Good. Now we move to Phase 2. We need to reach the command center and extract Captain Rivera. The Marines looked at him with complete trust. They had weapons now, taken from captured guards. They had leadership. They had a plan. And they had Doc. The assault on the Zekthari command center was swift and brutal. The Marines moved through the city using routes Doc had mapped during his months of observation. They hit supply convoys, disabled communication posts, and liberated other prisoner camps along the way. By midday, 2,000 human prisoners were armed and coordinated. By evening, they had reached the command center. General Crathnor watched his perfect occupation collapse in real time. Reports flooded in from all sectors. Simultaneous uprisings, communication failures, strategic positions lost. It was impossible. The humans had been subdued. The prisoners had been separated. There was no way they could have organized this. How? He demanded of Thralix, who stood beside him in shock. How did they coordinate this? Thralix pulled up files frantically. I don't understand. We monitored all communications. We separated their command structure. He stopped, his head tendrils going rigid. On his screen was the file for Marcus Chen, Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class, designation Doc, status, non-combatant. The medic, Thralix whispered. It was the medic. Crathnor stared at him. What? We categorized him as non-combat. We gave him access to multiple camps for medical purposes. We allowed him to keep his equipment. We let him treat our own soldiers. Thralix's voice was hollow. He built an entire intelligence network right under our observation, and we never saw it because we never thought to look. At that moment, the command center doors exploded inward. Marines poured through, weapons ready. Leading them was a man in torn medical utilities with a bag slung over his shoulder. Doc walked calmly into the command center, ignoring the weapons pointed at him. He approached the Zekthari general with steady eyes. General Crathnor, Doc said politely. I'm Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Marcus Chen. I believe you're holding my captain. I'd like her back, please. Behind Doc, 100 Marines stood ready, and outside an entire city was rising up. The occupation was over. Crathnor looked at this human medic, this supposedly non-threatening support personnel, and finally understood just how badly they had miscalculated. The Doc, he said quietly. We missed the Doc. Yes, Doc agreed. You did. The liberation of New Sarajevo took 36 hours from start to finish. The coordinated uprising, combined with the UNSC fleet's precision strikes, shattered the Zekthari occupation. What had taken them weeks to build collapsed in less than 2 days. By the time the last Zekthari soldiers surrendered, the human forces controlled every major facility on the planet. Doc stood in the command center, surrounded by Marines, watching as Captain Rivera was brought up from the detention levels. She was thin and tired with bruises on her face, but her eyes were clear and determined. Captain, Doc said, snapping a salute. Rivera looked at him for a long moment, then pulled him into a brief, hard embrace. Doc, I should have known it would be you. Just doing my job, ma'am. Your job is keeping Marines alive. This was a little beyond that, Doc shrugged. Keeping them alive meant getting them out. It's all the same mission. Around them, the Marines were securing prisoners and establishing control. Sergeant Willis approached with a report. All camps liberated, Captain. We're still doing a final head count, but it looks like we got everyone. Casualties? Rivera asked, remarkably low, ma'am. Doc's plan worked perfectly. We hit them so fast and in so many places at once that they never had time to organize a response. Rivera nodded, then turned to Doc. You built all this while they thought you were just a medic? They saw what they expected to see, Doc replied. They understood ranks but not culture. They knew I was medical personnel, but they didn't understand what that means in human military. Especially not what it means to Marines. General Crathnor, now a prisoner himself, stood under guard nearby. He had been listening to the conversation with growing comprehension. He spoke up suddenly in careful English. I wish to understand, he said. We studied your military structure for months. We documented every rank, every hierarchy. How did we miss you? Doc turned to look at him. The general saw no anger in the human's expression, only a calm assessment. After a moment, Doc walked over to stand before him. You didn't miss me, Doc said. You saw me. You scanned my bag. You watched me work. You let me move between camps. You did everything right according to your intelligence analysis. Then what did we do wrong? You understood our structure, but you didn't understand our bonds. Doc gestured to the Marines around them. You saw Captain Rivera and knew she gave orders. You saw Sergeant Willis and knew he led troops. You saw Private Rodriguez and knew he followed commands. That's hierarchy. That's what you were looking for. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But you saw me and thought medical officer, non-combatant, no tactical value. You were partially right. I'm not a combat soldier. I don't give orders to Marines. But you didn't understand that in human military culture, especially among Marines, Doc isn't just a rank. Then what is it? Crathnor asked. One of the Marines, a young private, spoke up. It's a promise, sir. Doc nodded. That's exactly what it is. When a corpsman joins a Marine unit, we make a promise. We promise to keep them alive, to run toward danger when everyone else is running away, to patch them up and send them back to fight, or to stay with them when they can't fight anymore. The Marines know this promise. They trust it completely. He looked around at the faces watching him. These Marines have been in 3 wars with me. I've pulled them out of burning vehicles. I've treated them under fire. I've held their hands when they were dying, and I've celebrated with them when they survived. Captain Rivera has command authority, but I have something different. I have their absolute trust. Sergeant Willis nodded. Doc says jump, we ask how high. Doc says wait, we wait. Doc says attack, we attack. Not because he's giving orders, but because we know he would never ask us to do something unless it was necessary, unless it was to save lives. Doc continued. You saw my medical training and assumed it made me less dangerous. But my medical training means I know exactly how much punishment a human body can take. I know how to keep people functional under extreme stress. I know how to make quick decisions when lives are on the line. Combat medics see more blood and trauma than most soldiers. We have to stay calm when everything is chaos. That's not a weakness, General. That's an advantage. Crathnor was silent, processing this information. Threlix, standing nearby, spoke up. Our medical personnel are strictly non-combat. They are kept away from fighting. They have no tactical training. It never occurred to us that humans would combine medical and combat roles. That's why you lost, Doc said simply. You assumed your model was universal. But humans are different. We don't see medical and combat as separate. We see them as 2 parts of the same mission, keeping our people alive and completing the objective. Captain Rivera stepped forward. The Doc designation isn't official military rank in the traditional sense. It's earned through trust. Every corpsman who serves with Marines can be called Doc, but very few earn the kind of loyalty Marcus has. That loyalty is what you couldn't see or measure in your intelligence reports. Doc looked at Crathnor directly. You wanted to understand human military hierarchy. But the most dangerous humans aren't always the ones giving orders. Sometimes we're the ones keeping everyone alive long enough to fight back. You saw a medic. They saw their brother. You saw non-combat. They saw someone who would walk through fire to pull them out. You cataloged my rank. They knew my worth. The general was quiet for a long moment. Finally he spoke. If we had understood this, would it have changed anything? You would have separated me from the other prisoners immediately, Doc said. You would have watched me much more carefully. You would have limited my access. But honestly, I still would have found a way. Because that's what we do. Marines don't quit and Docs don't let Marines down. Ever. 3 days later, the Zekthari formally requested negotiations. They had lost New Sarajevo, and they had learned that conquering human space would be far more difficult than anticipated. The war was not over, but both sides recognized that a diplomatic solution was preferable to continued conflict. The negotiations were held on a neutral station. General Crathnor, released for the purpose, led the Zekthari delegation. Captain Wu represented Earth's military command. Captain Rivera was also present, as were several other officers, and Doc Chen was there at Rivera's request. When Crathnor entered the negotiation room and saw Doc sitting calmly at the table, medical bag at his feet, the general stopped. You brought the Doc, he said. Wu looked puzzled. Corpsman Chen was instrumental in the liberation. It seemed appropriate. Yes, Crathnor said quietly. Yes, it is appropriate. The negotiations lasted 4 days. A ceasefire was agreed upon, with provisions for prisoner exchange and the withdrawal of Zekthari forces from human space. More importantly, both sides agreed to share military cultural information to prevent future misunderstandings. On the final day, as the delegations were preparing to depart, Crathnor approached Doc privately. I have a question, the general said. Personal curiosity, not military intelligence. Go ahead, Doc replied. During the occupation, did you ever doubt? Did you ever think you would fail? Doc considered the question carefully. There were moments when I was scared, moments when I wasn't sure if help would arrive in time, but doubt that we would make it? No, not for a second. How could you be so certain? Because I made a promise to those Marines, and I've never broken a promise to them. Doc smiled slightly. That's what being Doc means. It means no matter how bad things get, no matter how impossible it seems, you find a way. You keep your people alive. You bring them home. Crathnor nodded slowly. We will update our intelligence files on human military structure. There will be a special entry about medical personnel. About docs? Good, Doc said. Maybe it'll save lives on both sides next time. Let us hope there is no next time. Doc returned to Earth 3 weeks later aboard the UNSC Perseverance, finally repaired and ready to fly. The crew that had been captured so many months ago was together again, plus several dozen Marines who had fought in the liberation. As the ship prepared to leave orbit, a young Marine, the same private who had first asked Doc what to do in the detention camp, approached him in the medical bay. Doc, can I ask you something? Always, Doc replied, organizing his medical supplies. Back in the camp, when everything seemed hopeless, how did you stay so calm? How did you know what to do? Doc paused and looked at the young Marine. You want to know the truth? I was terrified. Every single day. I was scared we'd be discovered, scared the plan would fail, scared I'd let you all down. But you never showed it. Because showing it wouldn't help you. My job is to keep you alive and keep you fighting. Sometimes that means treating injuries. Sometimes that means organizing an uprising. But it always means being the person you can count on when everything goes wrong. He smiled. Does that make sense? The private nodded. Yeah, Doc, it does. As the Perseverance jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading home, Doc sat in his quarters and finally allowed himself to relax. His medical bag sat beside him, battered and worn. Inside were bandages, medications, surgical tools, and a dozen other items that had served purposes far beyond their intended design. He thought about the Marines sleeping in their bunks, safe and heading home. He thought about Captain Rivera on the bridge, commanding her ship again. He thought about all the people who had trusted him, who had followed his plan, who had survived because they believed in him. Being Doc was the hardest job in the military. It meant carrying the weight of everyone's survival. It meant making impossible decisions. It meant never ever giving up no matter how bad things got. But it was also the most important job. Because at the end of the day, Docs kept Marines alive, and there was no mission more sacred than that. Doc closed his eyes and allowed himself a small smile. They had made it. Every single one of them, just like he had promised.